Okay, the snow that you're looking at here on 279 North yesterday and then on 279 slowed down hundreds of drivers last night, including me. I was really surprised by it because it kind of came out of nowhere. There were no snow at all, and then suddenly it was like a blizzard. But I thought, okay, well, it's a typical January evening.
Yeah, but it wasn't. We
Right.
were talking with folks at the National Weather Service in Pittsburgh today, and you're right, it was snow. It was lake effect snow. Typically, the lake effect snow, though, would generate from Lake Erie. This was an extremely unusual event because it started at the Beaver Valley nuclear power plant.
It was kind of a man-made lake plume. It's almost like having a mini Lake Erie right up there over Beaver Valley. Same sort of effect. We've probably had it every time we have a strong Arctic outbreak.
Yeah, that's meteorologist Rich Kane with the National Weather Service in Pittsburgh. He picked up on this last night looking at the Doppler radar images, so I went back this afternoon and pulled some data. This is a Storm Tracker Doppler 11 radar image from 7:44 last night. You can clearly see the little thin lake effect band. It's about 2 miles north to south, 30 miles west to east. The Midland or shipping port plant, the Beaver Valley nuclear plant, is here, and what happened basically was a lake effect snow event. We had warm, moist air rising from the cooling towers. That air estimated to be about 90 to 95 degrees. That, of course, going into the Arctic cold air, and it produced a band of snow which was carried by the west to east wind, and it ended up falling across the Wexford-Gibsonia area, and estimates were about 1 inch to 2 inches. Lots of folks caught in it, including Peggy, and hopefully you made it home safely last night. A very unique snow event akin to a lake effect snow event that we would get here.
My name is Rich Kane. I'm the meteorologist in charge of the National Weather Service here in Pittsburgh. Well, what we had is actually a plume of snow that actually came off the cooling towers from the Beaver Valley nuclear power plant. What happens in the atmosphere when you have temperatures basically between about -4 Fahrenheit and about 14 degrees Fahrenheit, that's the section of the atmosphere where snow grows the best. And guess what? Our maximum temperature yesterday, I think, was about 13 degrees or so. Our minimum was 5 degrees. So that level was very near the surface of the earth. If you put a moisture source and a heat source like the plume, like the warm moisture vapor from the cooling tower, instantaneously you form snow crystals and you actually have a plume that streams off of that with the mean wind. And that's exactly what happened, as we can see from the radar yesterday.
So you're telling me this wasn't like something that could be predicted? This was a kind of a man-made thing that happened then?
It was kind of a man-made lake plume. It's almost like having a mini Lake Erie right up there over Beaver Valley. Same sort of effect. We've probably had it every time we have a strong Arctic outbreak. Sometimes you never see it. Sometimes it occurs in different directions. All depends on the low-level winds and the speed and direction.
Yeah, so it was something like that, you know, people say, oh boy, how did the meteorologists, how did the weather people miss this? But it was nothing that they really would have known about.
No, it's a very localized too because of the moisture source. It's not like we have Lake Erie right next door. So it's a very localized type phenomena that happens. So it is tough to say exactly where the plume is going to be, how strong the plume is going to be, how much moisture is going to fall. We figured we had a report of 1 inch of snow, but as cold as it was, that's very, very, very little liquid water. So it wasn't a whole lot of water. But of course, if that inch of snow falls on your sidewalk or the roadway, you know, it could make things hazardous.
Right, I know of people who were stuck in traffic on 279/79 and said it was almost like a whiteout. I mean, how far can that travel and how bad can it be? Well,
in this case, you had just the right conditions. They were optimal. So the plume was fairly large. It stretched from basically Beaver Valley nuclear power plant all the way to the Westmoreland County line. Now, it wasn't, you know, a lot of snow underneath the entire plume, but areas, you know, picked up a fair amount of snow in a short period of time just from the plume itself. But again, it's really hard to predict because it's a very localized phenomenon. You just need just the right conditions to happen to get it.
How many times in a year around this area would you say that happens?
Well, we get on a typical year, we may have a couple of Arctic outbreaks, really cold air. When you look back, January 3rd, we had a high of 33 and a low of 5. But yesterday it was only 13 and 5, so the real cold Arctic air was pretty shallow to the ground. That doesn't happen all the time. So maybe once or twice a year we might get a good Arctic outbreak. And some years we may not get any really good Arctic outbreaks. It all depends on the year, the season, and of course the jet stream, how that flows, and how we get the good cold air out of Canada. But this could happen a couple of times a year. And again, it may not always be this extensive. or be this visible, because you have to have just those right conditions. Again, the colder the air that you put over a warm, moist source, it's just like lake effect, you can get more snow from that. So you really need just the right conditions.
So the source, the warm, moist source was like the stacks at the
Was the
tower?
cooling towers of the moist, warm air coming out of that. The atmosphere becomes buoyant as it rises. It actually is in that preferred zone for temperature, and it goes right to snow crystals immediately. So again, it's just like a mini Lake Erie just upstream from you. So again, it doesn't happen all the time. It's fairly rare, but we've probably seen them before, but they probably weren't as visible and maybe produced that much snow.
So yesterday was kind of like a perfect storm for that to happen, and that was probably the worst, about as bad as it could get, right?
Yeah, and sometimes you get the conditions where you actually get true lake effect coming off the lakes, Erie and Huron, and maybe some of these small mini plumes from the towers could get mixed with that, and you can't tell which one's which. But yesterday was pretty good because it was the only thing happening there for the time, and it was the main player on the radar, and it was the main player putting down the snow that it did.
And that just shows up all of a sudden on the radar. It's not like something that comes in from I mean, how do you know? Is there any way to predict that that's going to happen?
Well, it takes a while to develop. So if you get that cold air near the surface, and assuming they're pumping out warm moisture all the time, some of it may depend on how much moisture is pumped out, what the temperature of the cooling tower is, and the temperature of the warm moist air coming out of that. Some of it may depend on that, and that's conditions we have no control over. But assuming it's warm moist air, it probably just like lake effect. When you get that really good cold dense air at the surface, you probably form some type of plume. But unless you have those temperatures just right, with the winds just right, it may not always form a plume that can be easily visible or that puts down an inch of snow in a short period of time.